work to create dynamic blocks. We're not going to talk about those right now. They're a bit complicated. Right now, I just want to show you Block Basics 101. But right now, let me move this out of the way. We can see that this chair is drawn on the chair layer. So that means that every time I draw or copy or insert this chair block, it's always going to look magenta. So let's change that. I'll select all of the objects here in the block, switch it from layer chair to layer 0. Say, well, now it's always going to be black or white depending on the background. That's not the case. Let's close the block editor and we're going to save the changes to chair. This one's yellow. Why is that? Because it's on the door layer. Why this chair is on the chair layer. I can use the match properties and make them all yellow because I've changed their layer. So, well, I don't want them on the door layer. I want them on the plant layer. Now they're all red. So you can see you can do a lot of things with blocks very quickly. Or, in fact, I can go to the chair layer and I can change its color to blue. And now the chairs are all blue. That's the power of blocks. You can't do that on a board drawing. So make sure that when you draw with blocks, that you draw them all on layer 0. And then once you insert the block, you put the block on the layer you want it to be on. That way I can have two types of chairs. Let's say I have a chair layer, which I do. These are for my new chairs. Now let's say I have old chairs. We'll call this layer chair to be removed. And we're going to make it a different color. Let's say gray. And we're going to make the line type dashed, or let's go hidden. Let's say I have chairs that I need to get rid of. Say this row here. I can set their layer to chairs to be removed. And everything else is on the chair layer. So now when I go to my drawing, I can see that these chairs are a lighter color than this and I need to do something with them. They're not highlighted like these new chairs are. Of course, then I can label them with a multi-leader or with some text and say, these chairs are to be removed. These are all new chairs. So you can do things like that with your layer manager, with your different layers and with blocks, and you can do them very quickly. It's a good practice to create a block library somewhere where you can keep and organize all of your blocks so that you can use them in the future. Put them on your network somewhere where you can get to them and where anyone else can get to them as well. Save them in the cloud on Autodesk 360. That way you'll always have them available for you when you want to use them. But make the blocks and make sure you can use them somewhere else. And I'll show you how to do that in another section. There are many ways to create blocks in AutoCAD. Any drawing can be even used as a block. So you can start a new file and draw a block there. Later, you can insert that file with the insert command. Now it's a block in your drawing. Or you can combine objects in your current file to make a block inside it. Then you can export that as a block or as a file to be used later on. If you start with a blank file, like I have right here. If not, you can type in the word new, click acad.dwt for the template, and pick open. Now, let's start a new block here. We're going to draw a chair. We want to keep it simple. So let's use some rectangles. So let's save this file before we get started. Let's call it chair. I started a file here already, but I'm going to overwrite it. Call it chair. In my case, I want to replace it, but if you have a brand new file, then you won't have that option. It'll just start the file. Okay, now we have a blank file. Let's check our units. Let's go to architectural and inches. Click OK. Now we want to create a very simple chair. Let's do that. Let's use rectangles. Type in REC. Pick a point anywhere right now. Let's make it 2 feet tab by 2 feet. Enter. That's a basic chair. Now it needs a back. We'll draw another rectangle. Snap here. And let's make it 2 inches wide. Let's draw another rectangle for the back. And we'll put it in right about here. Anywhere is good. There we go. That's a basic chair. Save the file again, and there you go. You just made a block. Now, if you wanted to create that same block, but keep it inside your file, you need to use the block command. Otherwise, this file alone, all by itself, can be used as a block in another drawing, and I'll show you how to do that with the insert command. But if you want to make a block inside your drawing itself, you just type the word block on the command line, press enter, give it a name. Let's call this chair. Pick a base point. Now that can be anywhere. Just think about it for a minute though. When I insert this block, what do I want its reference point to be? I mean, where do I want it all to be based off of? It can be right in the middle of the chair. It can be in a corner, it can be in the middle of the back, middle of the front. It doesn't matter. And you can always change that later. I'm going to pick the midpoint of the back. Okay, now we've established the insertion point of the block. I'm going to select the objects. This rectangle and that one. Once you've picked everything, press enter. Here you get a little preview of what it's going to be. And now you can set up some behavior. You can allow them to be exploded, which is probably an okay thing in this case, but you don't have to do that. We'll talk about exploding later on. Give it a little description here. This is a chair. Block units are okay. Okay. Now when I pick this object, you see it's now a block. There you go, you've created a block, and you can insert this, you can copy it, you can mass produce it very quickly. That's all there is to it. Draw your line work, select it, and then have at it. Block that you've created in your file and save it somewhere, you have a couple of choices. You can pick from a list of the blocks in the current file, or you can create one from scratch or whatever. But first you want to start with the command called wblock. Press enter. Now you can create a block right here, or you can export the entire drawing. This is essentially going to copy the file, or you can pick from a block that's already in your drawing. We have one right here. Just click down on the arrow, it'll give you a list of the blocks. That's chair. And now you pick where you want it to go and your insert units. Well, we drew it in inches, so we want to keep it in inches. Let's find a pathway for it. You can save it to your cloud, and I'm going to call it chair. Click OK, and there you go. You just exported a block. Now it's available for you to use in any other drawing that you want. A good practice to follow when creating blocks is to make sure you draw its contents on layer 0. We talked about this in the previous section, but I want to remind that to you again. When a block's contents are on layer 0, they will take on the properties of the layer they are inserted on. That allows the creator of that drawing to be able to use this block in any way that they want to. They can make it dark, they can make it thin, they can make it dashed line work, continuous line work, etc. But if you commit to them a set of layers, they can't change that block en masse, especially, or quickly, or they can't even change the block individually. They're stuck. They have to go into the block editor, change your block so that they can have the opportunity to change it on the fly. So always draw your blocks on layer 0. Make them by layer. It will save you time and effort in the end. Plus, you'll be able to use the same block in many different ways in the same drawing. The first steps in using blocks. The next step will be inserting them into your drawing. To do this, use the insert command. Pick the block that you want to use from the current file. If it's not here or you don't have any, then you have to browse to the folder where the file is located. Just click on the Browse button, find your folder, pick the block, click Open, and then you have a few options. Now you can also insert any DWG file as a block. In fact, a block that's been saved externally or been imported out of a file is just saved as a .dwg file. AutoCAD doesn't see them as being different. And a block is essentially a DWG file that's been saved inside another DWG file. So they go hand in hand. Now the insert window here allows you to do a few things to your block upon inserting it. You can give it a specific coordinate to insert into, or you can just pick it on screen. The majority of the time, you're going to want to just specify it on screen. Your scale is a scale factor. Now your block is drawn so big, so whatever it is, if it needs to be bigger or smaller, you can change the scale here in X, Y, and Z. In AutoCAD LT, you don't have the Z options. Now you can specify the scale on screen if you'd like. You can put it in right here, or you can make them all uniform. But typically, you're going to only want to insert it at the scale of 1. That's going to put it in the exact same size that it was drawn at. Now, if you want to insert a block that's been drawn in inches, but you're working in feet or millimeters, that's okay. AutoCAD is smart. It knows that it needs to convert that, as long as you've given it the proper information. So as long as the block or the file you're inserting was set up with a proper block unit insertion setting, the chair was drawn in inches, and so it was set to inches. Our drawing here is set to inches, so everything's good. It's going to scale it with a factor of 1, meaning it's not going to scale it. You can also rotate it if you want, and that's okay. So let's insert this block, and I'm going to just keep everything the way it is, except that I'm going to specify on the screen where I want the block to go. Now I click OK to insert, and now I can put my chair wherever I want. And there we go. It's that simple. Let's try it again. Insert, scale, uniform scale, and if you leave your scale on, meaning if you specify it on screen, then you'll have the options to do that. You pick your point, and then it will ask you your scale factor. Now, as I drag my mouse around, it scales up or down. I can type in 2, and it will insert it twice as big. Now we have a regular chair and a big chair. Now, it's a normal practice to use the coordinates of 0, 0 as a reference point for a lot of different things. Site plans, architectural drawings, surveys, etc. Inserting a title block and other items at 0, 0 is also a common practice, especially when you're working in paper space. That every block's insertion point is located at 0, 0 of that individual block. Also, once inserted, a block can be copied, moved, rotated, etc., just like any other object. Now let's see what would happen if our units were set differently. Right now we're set to inches. Let's set them to feet. Click OK. And we've inserted these already in inches, and they're 2 feet by 2 feet. This one is 4 feet by 4 feet. But now that AutoCAD thinks that our insertion units are in feet, what's going to happen? Let's insert the exact same block, and now we see the scale factor of 0.0833, or it's a factor of 12. Let's turn the specify on screen off for the scale. Click OK. There it is. Really tiny, because it thinks the 24 units here, 24 inches long, it's actually 24 feet. So it scaled it automatically. So if something comes in too big or too small, it happens. You can just scale it to the proper size that it needs to be once you insert it, or you can go back to the original file or block and fix the insertion units. You do that by going to Units, Enter, and picking on what they need to be. You do the same thing in the block file. Now, if you go to insert a block and you browse to it to find the block, we'll say Chair, Open, and our chair block is already here. If that's the case, then it will ask you this prompt. It will say, do you want to redefine the block, or you want to use the one that's already in your file? It's a very good question and a very important one to pay attention to and to understand what you're trying to do. Here's the case. If I redefine the block, then it's going to redraw all of the instances of my block in my file to match the new one that I'm inserting now. If I click Don't Refine Chair, then it's going to just insert a copy of the chair block that's already in my file. Now in this case, the line work is identical. But let's open it up, just like you would any other file, and let's change it. Just something simple. Use the stretch command, and let's make it very obvious that it's different. Click Save, Now here's a trick that you can use. If you hold down the Control and Tab key, it will toggle to another file that you have currently open. You can do that very quickly. So now I'm in my other drawing. Let's use the Insert command again. Browse to the chair file. This is what it's going to look like. It's my preview. Doesn't look like this. Click Open. Now click Insert, and let's redefine the block. See, the other 3 instances of my block were updated, and now I'm inserting the new version. Be careful with that, because you can find blocks that have the same names, like chair. Chair is a very generic name for a block, so you probably don't want to call a block by the name of chair. Maybe you want to call it chair-square or chair-option 1, something like that, something that will define it for what it really is. That way you won't accidentally override your previously inserted chair blocks. Blocks can be used for several purposes. As we saw, creating a simple block is not that complicated at all. Editing them is also easy. Let's open up the annotation file for this chapter. Let's start by inserting a block. First, let's go to Model Space. That's where the line work belongs. Type the word insert, or you know what? If it's on the ribbon, where do you think it would be at? Well, we're in the Home tab. Here's a block panel. Here's Insert. You can also create a block, open up the block editor, and edit different attributes in an attributed block, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Those are really cool. Those put in fields inside a block that you can edit. And each block has a field, and so you can put a different value in that field for every instance of the block. You can do a lot with those things. And here are some other things that you can use to edit them. We'll look at those later on. Click Insert. Now select the chair block. We already have one in this drawing, so we're going to use that. Click OK. Now let's place it in this room here. There you go. It's that simple. Blocks are used to create and change objects very quickly, especially line work that it's repeated, just like the line work for this chair. If you need a second type of chair, then you have to make a second chair block. The nice thing about having one chair style is that if I edit the chair block, and once I do edit that block, then every place where we inserted it, for example, it's already been inserted throughout this room, then all of those chairs will also be updated instantly. We don't have to go back to each chair and update it. That's why we use CAD. To do that on the drafting board, you'd have to erase all of the chairs and redraw each one individually, and that takes time. So to edit a block, you can do this a couple of different ways. Select it and go up here in the ribbon and click on the block editor, or you can type in the word bedit for bedit, press enter, and this will bring up a list of all of the blocks that are in your file. Find the one you want, select it, click OK. Now another method is to select the block, right-click, and pick the block editor. Or you can double-click the block, and it will bring up the block editor list, find the block you want, and it should highlight the block you've just double-clicked on, and click OK. That's the method I like to use because it's the quickest, and it requires the fewest amount of steps. So now you're in the block editor mode. And the block editor is a contextual ribbon tab. It has all of your block editing tools. All of your other tools that you have, like drawing lines, circles, etc., are also available to you here in the block editor. Once you're done editing your block, you can pick on the Close Block Editor button. If you made changes to it, it'll ask you if you do want to save those changes or discard them. You say, no, you know what, I don't want to make any of these changes. I give up, I quit. It didn't really mean this. That's okay. Don't feel bad. But there are two main ways to edit a block. You can edit them through the block editor, as we just saw, or you can edit them in place. Either one will do the same thing, and it just depends on what you need. The block editor gives you lots of fancy buttons, as you saw, and puts all of your block editing options right there in front of you. But editing a block in place allows you to edit the block as it exists in your drawing. this gives you a different view or a different perspective. And if your block needs to relate or correspond to your other line work, but still remain a block all on its own, that's a good method to use. To get to that, select your block, right-click, and pick the Edit Block in Place. This starts what's called the Ref Edit or the Reference Edit command. Pick the chair, pick OK, and everything else is going to fade back. Now, I can't really pick these things and do anything to them, but I can draw lines and I can snap to them. Now, what I'm drawing now is going to be a part of the block. Let's say I want to create a desk with the chair block, but I want to make sure that the chair fits against the wall properly. Start the line command, and I want to put it on this wall. And I can. Turn on my ortho command and close it. So now I have my chair, I have my desk, and I know that it fits properly against the wall here. All I have to do is come up here and hit Save Changes, and it says all of your changes are going to be saved. Click OK or Cancel if I want to keep going. And there you go. That's one block. Now, we edited the chair block. We added this table portion to it. What do you think is going to happen to the rest of the drawing? There you go. All of these other chairs now have tables as well. And that's okay. I can do something kind of cool here. If I select, right-click, and edit the block in place, see, it's only the one block all by itself now. So it kind of hides these things. This is kind of tricky, and it makes it kind of confusing because we really wanted those chairs to be there. But I can kind of see what's going on here. And I can use the stretch command to make my table a bit smaller. Then come up here to the Ref Edit panel on the ribbon. Click Save Changes. Okay. And now all my tables are fixed. So now we've set up a room with tables and chairs, and we can make changes to it globally very quickly. That's the beauty of blocks. Now if we look at the block editor again, just double click on one of the blocks, pick chair, okay. This will open it up in the block editor. I can't see anything else but the line work for the block. It isolates it, but that's okay. Now, you have a lot of different options up here that we're not going to get to talk about, like the parametric constraints and the dimensional constraints and things like that. We will look at attributes and attribute definitions a little bit later on, and we will briefly look at some dynamic blocks. We'll give you an introduction to them, but they're very complicated and a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing here in this video. However, they are very useful. The block editor opens and it puts you in this block editing state. And this is how the block's going to look when you insert it into the drawing. Now we can make changes to all the line work here that we want just the same way you would in a regular drawing mode. Now, it allows you to edit this block without any other objects getting in the way, which is nice. We'll change the chair again. Let's get rid of our table, delete it. Let's put all of the line work here, not on the chair layer, but on layer 0, and make sure it's set to by layer. And there we go. Now we can also make some other changes to it here. We can give it rectangular arms instead of elliptical. Use the mirror command to erase that one. And now we have a little bit different chair. One thing that's really cool about the block editor is that you can test your block. If I click Test Block, it'll show me what it's going to look like in the drawing mode. If we made a dynamic block or an attributed block, this is very important because I can keep editing my block, but I can see how it's going to work. With static line work like this, it's really not a big deal. You know exactly what's going to happen. So when you're done testing your block, pick the Close Test Block window. AutoCAD will reset itself inside the block editor, and when you're all done, everything's great. You can close the block editor, save the changes, and now our chair is saved. It's on the proper layer, it's on chair. You can test it out by changing one of the layers real quick. Just getting a preview, say yes, it's working the way I want it to. Fantastic. So now you know how to edit a block, and you've found a couple of different ways on how to make those changes. Typically, you're going to want to use the block editor. But if you need to make changes to a block in reference to the surrounding line work, edit the block in place. Also, though, sometimes with the editing block in place, like with attributes, we'll look at those later on, it may be a little bit difficult to do that. So for static line drawings, just like this chair, with no moving parts or anything, editing it in place is fine, and editing it in the block editor is also just as fine. Great tools that enable us to recreate similar line work rapidly. They can also contain metadata in what is called attributed blocks. A block attribute is a label or tag that essentially attaches data to your line work. Some examples of this data could be a part number, price for that part, specific comments, names, cost, manufacturer, anything you can dream of. When a block is created, you can add text to it, but that doesn't make it an attribute. You have to add attributed text to the block. They are distinctly different. Attributed text in a block can be edited and extracted by the user inserting the block. They can also be visible or invisible. When an attributed block is inserted into your file, you'll be prompted to enter in the data values that will be stored with that block. Some attributes can be constant, or some attributes can be uneditable, like a part number or a name for an example. Let's open up the attributed block example. This is a typical, very simple attributed block. It's a title block for a drawing. Right here, you can see that this is a block. All the other grips here also tell you that those are attributed fields. That means we can edit them. To edit the attributes of a block, you just double-click the block. That will open up the attribute editor. Here you have different tabs, and here you have a list. I'm going to stretch it down so you can see everything that's in our file. While this is open, I can't zoom out, I can't pan, it yells at me. So all you can do is edit the text that's in here. Now you can see the names and the text will correspond with what you see here. This is the plan tag, this is the prompt, and this is the value. This is the plan name 1, and the value is what AutoCAD will insert by default if you don't put anything into it. It's a placeholder. I come down here to the value field, and I just edit this text. As you make changes to that text, you'll see that your drawing will update. And you can change it. Type in your text, press enter, and it takes you down to the next option. Now you can see it'll type in whatever you type in. Just make your changes. And press enter and continue on. You have your sheet title, the client name, job number, designed by, drawn by, date, sheet number, and total number of sheets. So you can put in numbers, you can put in text, anything that you can put into your annotation, your text, you can put in here. If you right click, you get a cut, copy, paste, delete, insert field, and a select all type of a thing. That'll select everything in here. When you're finished, click apply or click OK, and you come out of the text editor. So that's simple. That's what's really cool about attributed blocks. And now I can copy this. I essentially can put it on another drawing. If my sheet title, my client name, my drawn by, date, designed by, project number are all the same, I don't have to reinsert or retype those bits of information into every drawing that I create. I can just copy this title block and put it in there, and most of my work is already done for me. All I'll have to do is maybe change the sheet title, and since it's not sheet number 1, it's sheet number 2. Now let me show you a little trick. If you hold down the control key and double click on the attribute, I can edit just that one. Click on it. It may or may not, though it typically will, come to the right piece of data that you want to change. So you have to type it in, Click OK and go through a couple of steps. If I'm only changing one attribute, I like to use this little tip. Well, how do you create a block that has attributes in it? That's a great question. Now, I want to caution you, it can be a little overwhelming because there are a lot of different options available to you. We'll only look at some of the basics so that you can make your own attributed blocks. To create an attributed block, all you have to do is create an attribute definition. It's sort of like creating text, only there are a lot more, variables and things to assign to it. So let's edit this block so that we can see some existing attributes, plus we'll be able to add some more into it. And you can make any block an attributed block. You just have to add an attribute definition to it. Now, normally you would double click a block to activate it in the editor. Well, that's hard to do with an attributed block because when you double click it, it opens up the attribute editor. So that trick is gone here. You have to select the block itself and then pick the block editor button or right click and go to the block editor option. So this is the title block. That's what we want to edit. We click OK. And you can see here, it looks a little bit different because some of these are really expanded out. But if I look at one of these attributes like sheet, double click it to edit it. And you have three main points here of interest. One is the tag. That's the name of it. That's what it's called. That is an identifier for that attribute. The second one is the prompt. So if you use the insert command to insert an attributed block, it will prompt you to fill in each one of these attributes. And this is what it will tell you. Hey, this is the sheet title. And then by default, it will put in sheet title if you just press the enter key. Let me show you that before we go any further. So start the insert command. We're going to go to the title block. It's the only block in the file, so you'll be okay. Now I want my scale to be at 1. We're going to specify the insertion point on screen. Everything else is okay. Click OK. Now, this block is a little bit bigger than the others, so evidently those have been scaled down. That's okay. We're going to find our insertion point. For right now, just put it anywhere in the drawing. And while you're inserting your block, you can use your mouse with your scroll wheel to zoom in or out, or to click and hold it so that you can pan around. It's very useful. Pick your insertion point. The block didn't disappear, it's just not completely in yet. It's asking you for the plan name. Remember, we looked at it and it said what plan name 1, plan name 2, or the sheet title. Well, here's the tag, is plan name number 1. The prompt is plan name, and the default of what it's going to enter is plan name. Now we're going to give it a name here. We're going to call it my drawing. Press enter. And now it goes down to the next attribute. This is plan name number 2. Say, I made this. Enter. And it goes down the list. Client name, we'll call it XYC or XYZ. Client name 2. You can leave one blank. Just press the space bar. Job number, or you can just press enter and it will just put in the default field information and just go through there. So this client here, client number 2, if I want that field to be blank, I edit it, put in a space, and it's blank. And that's the same case with any of these. So that's what it looks like when you insert an attributed block. And let's learn how to make our own attributes. Click OK. Now we have all of these attribute fields here. This object is just regular text. It's static. Once it's inserted, it's not going to be changed by the user. However, this job number is an attribute definition, and you have your properties manager palette, which can make some changes to it. You can change the tag, you can change the text style, the value that it's going to default, justification height. It works and looks just like text. So let's create a new one. If I want to create an attribute definition, I have to come here, pick it, and this is the little window that you get. You can make it invisible. So, well, why would I want to do that? Well, you can assign a value. Maybe it's to count something, or maybe it's a serial number for a part, but but you don't want that number to show up on the drawing. That's very likely. So you can make it invisible. You can make it a constant. That gives it a fixed value for block insertions. That means it's not going to change. You can put a verify prompt on here. It will prompt you to make sure that the attribute value is correct when you insert the block. Now that can be very useful. It can also be very annoying. So it just depends. Do you want to have to do everything twice, or do you want to make sure that you did it right and you don't want to have to go back? That's up to you. Now the preset option will put in a default value when you insert a block. So it won't even ask you or prompt you to insert something. It will just automatically insert the default setting. You can lock its position so that it can't be moved. It can be on more than one line, etc. So you pick your insertion point. You're going to pick it on screen here and have to define the tag prompt and default. Let's say we want to know who designed this. We have a checked by, we have a drawn by, but we don't know, maybe someone else designed the project. That'll be fine. So let's say designed by. Put in the prompt. A lot of times, these are just going to repeat themselves. In the default, let's say designer. Now, if you click here, we can insert what's called a field. A field is a little bit more advanced for what we're trying to do here real quick, but essentially a field will look into the drawing and gather information for you. So if you have a hatch pattern or a closed polygon and you need to know the area of something, you can tell the field to, hey, look at the area of that specific object and put that information here in my attribute. And that's really cool. Now you have different text settings. Your justifications, left, align, fit, center, etc. We'll just stick with left. And the text style, go with notes. Is it going to be annotative? Not in this case. And how high is it going to be? The text height, well, that's defined here by our text style. You can even have it rotated. Once you get all these settings the way you want, you click OK. And if you've put spaces in your tag, well, it's going to yell at you just like it did to me. So you have to go to your tag, and what you can do instead of a space is to put an underbar or a dash or something. Click OK. And now we find a place here to put it. This really isn't designed for something like this, but that's okay. I'm just going to place it right there, and there we go. Now it's on whatever layer I've set it to. Layer 0. We may want to match the layers here, or we may just want to change everything to by layer. For right now, I'm just going to leave it. When we're done, we can test the block out, see what it looks like. Say, there it is. It says designer right there. Now, when I double click on it, is it going to be an option? Yes, it is. And I can change it all that I want. That's fantastic. The block works properly. Click close. And then click Close Block Editor. Yes, save the changes. And wait a minute, where did it go? It's not there. It didn't work. Well, this gets kind of tricky. You're going to have to use something here that's a block attribute manager. Now, don't laugh when I tell you the name of the command or what you're going to type in for it, because it really is a command. And it's one of my favorite commands to tell people about, because they don't believe me when I tell them it. The command, what we need to do, will automatically update all the instances of an attributed block so that it matches the changes that you've made. Otherwise, it's going to stay the way it is. All right, the command you need is Batman with 2 T's, BATTMAN. That's the block attribute text manager. It's a mouthful. So you see here, it gives you a list of the types of blocks you have in your file. We want to update the title block. And we get a look at it, say, yeah, this is fine. If I want these to be in a different order, it's meaning not where it's going to be on the screen, but meaning in how you're going to be prompted for them when you insert the block. So if you want any of these to be different, like maybe we want the sheet title to be the first one. Select it, click Move Up. So now, when we insert it, the sheet title, which is probably more appropriate, will be prompted first. Since we've added in this new attribute, we need to sync all of the other instances of the block. So click the sync button. Move this out of the way, you'll see it fixed it. You can click apply, click OK. And that's been fixed everywhere. So those are attributed blocks. They're very useful. If you're creating a site plan for a residential area and you need to create the storm drainage pipes or the storm drainage structures, you can create a labeled attributed block that will ask you to put in a part number, or hey, this is the number or the designation for that structure. It's structure 7 or structure E4, etc. And so that's a great way that you can do something very quickly by creating that block and then adding it to a multi-leader so that you can very quickly label and mark your structures or whatever type of item it is that you need to label. Block and modify it into a new block, but without messing up the old block. So the explode command can help. Open up the annotation drawing file. Make sure you go to the model space tab. The explode command explodes a compound object when you want to modify its components separately instead of editing the block. That means it breaks it down and turns it into all of the basic instances or objects that it's made of. So if we copy one of these chair blocks, we'll put it anywhere on our file. And if we explode it, now your explode command is just explode, or you can type in the letter X for explode, or as usual, it's right here on the ribbon. Go to the Home tab, Modify panel, right here, explode. Pick the object, press Enter, and there you go. These blocks are still intact. This is basic line work. We have a few ellipses, polylines, etc. Now the explode command will also explode other types of objects like polylines. It will break them up into their basic objects, like in this case a line and an arc. This polyline was only one type of item, but it turns it into an arc. You can also explode multi-line text, and that will turn those into single-line text. There are instances when you may want to do this, but typically you're not going to. Now that we have this chair exploded, we can make some minor changes. Generating new line work, but yet similar to our old line work. Doing a lot of the work for us already, so that we only had to make a few modifications. And now we can make a new block. We can call it chair 2. Pick our insertion point. Pick our objects. And there we go. And now when we go to insert a chair, we have two options. We have chair and we have air 2. I mistyped in the name. That's fine. If you do create a block and give it the wrong name, let me show you a trick. Use the rename command. Go to the blocks. Here's air 2. Puts the name here. That's the current name. And give it a new name. Chair-2. There you go. Everything else is the same. It's a block, and it's called chair-2. There you go. So that's why you would want to explode something like a block. Now let's look at something else. Let's open up the attributed block example. Now in this case, we have an attributed block. What happens if we explode it? Type in the letter X for explode, press enter, select the block, and enter again. Wow, we lost all the information in it that we had. And it's now an attribute again, but when you double click it, these are the fields you get, just like when you created the attributes. Well, if that's what you're looking for, then that's okay. But a lot of times you don't want to do that. In fact, most of the time you don't want to ever really explode a block, especially an attributed block. Now let's undo everything. I want to show you something. All of these attributes have text put into them. Let's put in something special too. Change a couple of them. Something special. Now if we explode it, we lose that. Okay, undo. I want to show you a different command. It works very similarly to the explode command, but when it comes to attributed blocks, it will retain the values you've inserted, and it's called burst. Press enter, select the block, press enter again. There you go. Say, well, it doesn't look any different. Sure it does. Look, that's just a line. This sheet title is just single line text. And that something special that I put in just for you is still there. So if you need to explode an attributed block for some reason, think about it for a second. What are you trying to? Blocks are very useful, as we've seen. They're pretty straightforward on how to create, and you can do a lot of different things with them. We've looked at static blocks and we've looked at attributed blocks, but there's another type of block called the dynamic block. A dynamic block is flexible, it's dynamic. It means it can change. It has intelligence built into it. They can easily be changed to display different line work very easily in a drawing. We've looked at some of them already in the previous sections and chapters, but I want to look at them a little bit more closely. Now, we're not going to cover every aspect of them because they're too complicated right now, but we're going to give you a brief introduction so that if you come across them, you'll know how to use them and you'll know how to make some of them, very basically anyway. Dynamic blocks make it so that you can customize a block instance to fit different needs. For example, let's say you needed a door that's 30 inches wide. Well, you'd have to make a block that's 30 inches wide. No big deal, right? Well, let's say that in the same project and in the same drawing file even, you needed a second door that had to be 32 inches wide. So that's okay. Copy it, stretch it up a little bit, save it as another block. So now you have two blocks. Well, let's say now all of a sudden the client has a special request and they want one that's 36 inches. Well, now you've got to make a third block. And then now let's say, well, you know what? All those 36-inch doors, I want them to be 34-inch doors. You have to change them. So you have to delete them all, reinsert them. That's some extra work. But if you had a block in there for that door that was already a dynamic block, then you could design it so that it would fit all these needs, but with just one block. That would help you to make the changes very quickly. It also makes these blocks more useful since one block can fill many needs. Let's open up the annotation file. Yes, I know, we've looked at it several times, and in fact, we're going to draw this whole file from scratch here as our final project. So you might want to take a good look at it. Let's go to the Model tab. Here we have several different types of blocks. We've looked at our chair block, and we've looked at some of the others. The door and the window block are both dynamic blocks. So you've used them and you just didn't even know it yet. The door block does exactly what I described to you before. It's set up right now to be drawn at 3 feet, but if I click this grip and I stretch it, it can go to 3 foot 4 inches, just like that. I can take this door and bounce it back, and I've completely redesigned these doors with just 2 grip edits, and I'm done. It is that simple. I can change it to a 2-foot door for skinny people, or I can put it back to where it was at. Otherwise, I'd have to recreate all the line work, stretch some things, move some things, rotate some things, etc. That's what a dynamic block will do. Now there are a lot of grips on this door. This one here will change the opening. It'll make it closed, put it at 60 degrees, 45 degrees, or all the way open to 90 degrees. Now this gives me a lot of options. So I can show some doors wide open. I can close other doors. And I only have one block. Otherwise, I'd have to do a lot of rotating and moving, etc. Well, I don't have to. Blocks. Now the window block is very similar. I can change the width of the window to a lot of different options. And all of these options that are here can be designed into the block itself. I can even make it so that it stretches this to any distance that I want. I can flip the block's orientation. I can change the width to match a more narrow need. Or I can move it to wherever it needs to go. So there are a lot of different things that you can do with dynamic blocks. And I'd really love to show you how to create them, but they're kind of complex. Think of it this way. Making a dynamic block is sort of like creating a computer program, but for geometry. Maybe it's not really that complex, but it is similar. AutoCAD comes with several dynamic blocks in them. If you press Control 3 to open up your tool palette, you'll have access to a lot of them. If you click on the Structures tab right here in the tool palette, any block that has that little lightning bolt on it means it's a dynamic block. These blocks here, they're not. But this beam is. Insert it, select it, and here you have a choice of all of these different types of wide flanges. Just pick the one you want, and it's drawn to spec. The I-beam and the channel work basically the same way, and they have imperial and metric examples in here. If you come down to some of the others, if you right-click on here, we can go to the architectural tool palette. Here's the door that we inserted. To insert it, just click it, and then find the place where you want it to go. Once you have it where it needs to be, you can use your dynamic blocks to flip it around, put it upside down, and close the door. Here's another one for some windows in an elevation view. And this one will stretch it out width-wise and height-wise. So these are great ways to very quickly draw things. Some of them will stretch and move around, flip doors open. Others, in the case of this toilet, if you pick it, it'll flip it from side to side, or you have options of different design types and in different design views. Your front, your plan view, your side view. Now, it does take time to draw all of these up, create the dynamic block, but once it's done, it's done. And now I can have 3 different designs for these toilets, all of which are shown in 3 different drawing views. So dynamic blocks will give you flexibility. They're dynamic. They can do a lot of different things, and AutoCAD has several of them. And in fact, if you need more, you can look for dynamic blocks on the internet somewhere. Save them, use them all over the place.